Who in their right mind would believe that the world was covered in water? Who in their right mind would believe that you could put all the animals of the world into a boat and that they could safely be on this boat for a year, and then all of a sudden these animals and people could spread out and multiply across the world? I mean, for crying out loud, this is impossible. What are you talking about? You must be out of your mind. Hold on. Not so fast. Let's talk about it. Hello, I'm Methodist Dave. I'm a professional theologian and Bible teacher. And today I want to talk a little bit about the story in the Bible of Noah and the ark. And a lot of people struggle with this story because it seems A, that God would destroy and kill all the people of the earth for no apparent reason, and B, that it could even happen, that something like that is just too fantastical, impossible. Well, as Conan Doyle created the great Sherlock Holmes, there was something that Sherlock Holmes was fond of saying. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So let's look at the story of Noah and the ark, and let's ask us this one question. Is it possible? I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I'm going to just pose the question. Is it possible that the story is true? Now, the world that we know today, as it is, did not exist this way always. Once upon a time, this globe looked vastly different. And all the continents that are spread out around the world today were likely concentrated in one singular continent, or one or more, but at least one larger continent that geologists have called Pangaea. If you look at a map of the globe, you can see how South America seems to tuck right up into the coast of Africa, that it almost looks like these two are just torn in two like a piece of paper. And geologists have discovered that rocks in Norway are similar to rocks in New England. So that at one point in time, our continents were compressed, and that at some point in time in history, they spread out. Well, if in that point in time in history, there were no mountains, because the mountains were formed by the continents in their shift across the globe, and as they come to a rest, the landmass, the weight of the landmass that's still traveling, would push the rocks and the land up into mountain ranges, both on the east and west coasts. And we see that in South America. There's a mountain range and all the way down the west coast, and there's a much smaller mountain range on the east coast of these continents. So that seems to indicate that at some point in time that through a motion that the continents drifted across and brought the mountain ranges up into place. And if you look at a world that is flat, then it's easy to see how it's possible for that to be covered in water. And if we look at the geological stratus, it seems to indicate that at one point in time the Earth was covered with water. And I think that's conceded by all of science, that at some point in time the Earth was covered in water. And we look at the Grand Canyon, and it seems to be stratified, that there are all these geological layers with almost no changes in the geological layers are straight and flat. That could only happen in a cataclysmic event. So there are indications that the world was covered in water, and that at one point in time it looked different than it did today. So it could have been flatter. I mean, we're looking at the climate change right now and warning about the ocean level rising and the polar ice cap melting and raising water levels up to flood deeply into the interior of most countries. And if that could happen just with the polar ice caps, just imagine if there was other ecological features in there. For instance, the Bible tells us that that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but it also tells us that the fountains of the deep broke open and water came from underground. And do you know that even today that there is water trapped under the crust of the earth, that there are underground lakes, rivers, reservoirs? And if these at one point in time were more substantial than they are today, then these could be another source of water coming in to flood the earth. And then when the water needs to drain, if those caverns would collapse, then the oceans would gain depth, and through the geological cataclysm, that ravines could form and the oceans would sink, and then the water would have a place to go to. So it's very logical that the entire earth could have been covered with water. And remember, in this flood story, the water only needs to be deep enough for animals to drown. So we're only talking a deep depth of maybe 30 to 60 feet. Could have been more, but it doesn't need to be that deep for this story to work. And as far as flood tales, well, they come from around the world. There's the Gilgamesh epic, which is our oldest story, where it talks about a man named Utnapishtim who was called to build a boat because it says the gods are angry because humans are too noisy. We're making too much of a racket. So they decide to wipe everybody out. But in Gilgamesh epic, Utnapishtim builds a cube-shaped boat. That wouldn't work. Would roll over. It has no stability. We're brought to the next question. Could you build such a boat? Well, looking at the biblical account, it gives us an account of cubits, which are about 18 inches. So roughly speaking, on estimate, the ark would have been 450 feet by 75 feet wide by 45 feet tall. So it would only draw about 20 feet of water. Like I said, it only needs to be floating on about 30 to 60 feet of water. The Cutty Sark, a 19th century clipper ship, was 212 feet long. So the ark would only be twice the length of the Cutty Sark. Also, forget all those little Fisher-Price models, those Sunday school images of the little short squat boat. We're talking barge. Think of 450-foot long barge. That's a 6-to-1 ratio. It's a good fit for a vessel that only has to float, that doesn't have to go under its own power. It's not trying to go someplace, it's just there to float. So 6-to-1 is a good ratio for a boat. And could a guy build it? Well, it says in the Bible that it took about 120 years from the time that God warned Noah to the flood comes. It was 120 years. That's a long time. The Great Pyramid of Giza was 23 million stones. And each stone is about 5,000 pounds. And the Egyptians built that in a couple decades. Didn't take 100 years. Coral Castle in Florida is this massive stone structure that was built by one man and one man only, and many of the stones there are up to 10 tons. Huge stones moved by one man alone. And by the way, there's nothing that says that Noah and his sons built this by themselves. He could just as easily hired people to cut wood and help construction. I mean, they didn't believe him, so why shouldn't they make some money off of him? Secondly, how are you going to get all those animals on this boat? Well, it has been calculated at that estimate that the ark would have 1.5 million cubic feet. That is the equivalent of 570 railroad cars. 10,000 square feet of deck space. That is a lot of space. The animals that Noah would have put on that animal, you wouldn't have a leopard and a cheetah and a panther and a puma and a lynx and a bobcat. You would have kinds. You would have a cat kind. You would have an animal that would represent a species, because most animals are, through microevolution, are descended from another form of an animal. They would have come from a much larger animal, and then through inbreeding, they would have developed different character traits. Like people, we are all essentially the same, but we have different appearances because we breed within a certain community. Then certain traits become dominant. If you live in an area where there's a dominant skin color, then people are all going to be that skin color, or hair color, or eye color, or body shape, or whatever. You're going to look like your ancestors. So these animals, through microevolution, changed over the course of time. There would be a deer kind, and a cat kind, and a canine kind, and all these different kinds. And over the course of time, these animals would split and they would diversify and become different animals. One Henry Morris has estimated that there are 1,398 kinds of animals. That means that representative Noah could have taken 6,744 animals. And a higher estimate could be 75,000 animals. Majority of animals on this planet are smaller than a sheep. So there's room. And then Noah didn't round these animals up. The Bible tells us that these animals came. So yes, it's possible for the earth to be covered with that much water. Yes, it's possible to build a boat that size that would hold the certain number of animals. But what's the most important thing I want to drive home for this account of Noah? A, that God was merciful, because in addition to the plenty of space for the animals required, there would have been plenty of room for other passengers. Not like that ridiculous movie that came out a few years ago that depicted Noah as trying to keep people off the boat. Noah was trying to get people onto the boat. He was warning people, and people rejected the message. So the message is that God is merciful, but God is also just. And it tells us that in those days, people did nothing but evil. Their hearts were evil and wicked all the time. If you can imagine one of the worst cities in any country, where the cartels rule and people are executed on a daily basis, and women are raped and attacked, and children are abused, and people are stolen from and beaten and murdered everywhere you go. That's the way what life had become, had degenerated into. God had to put a stop to it. So God gives us a warning that there will be a time of another judgment coming along. And God warns, I'm giving you a chance. Make the most of it. Thanks for joining me. If you've got any more questions on this, maybe we'll do another dive. We went pretty long on this, a little longer than I would have liked to, but I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this subject. But if you've got questions, just email me at methodistdave@gmail.com. Thank you, and you have a great day.